All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cultish. My name is Jeremiah Roberts, one of the co-hosts here, riding solo today, and I am back in action with my good friend Steve Matthews from California. You made a trip here last night. Good to have you back, man.
Always great to be here.
Awesome. So we are going to be talking today about Burning Man and all the things that entail with it. We talked about it about a year ago or so. We had Carl Tykrib and Robert and a couple other people that were there. They do outreach to Burning Man. They've done it for an extended amount of time. You have been to Burning Man yourself personally, and you've done a lot of research on it. In fact, we're going to be expounding upon an article that you wrote. I'll hold up here. This is the Spiritual Counterfeits Project. The article here, this is back in 2012. You wrote a very extended article. We'll have links in the description if you want to check this out, and also we'll have some other things here for you. We're going to go really in depth talking about Burning Man. So I'm going to hand it to you. Where do we start regarding everything regarding Burning Man? Where's the starting point on all this?
Transformational Festivals.
Transformational Festivals. Describe what that is.
Yeah, so I'll just say real quick that I have a saying, and I've said it on the show before, that 20-year-old kids are not rushing out and joining Jehovah's Witnesses anymore. They're going to Burning Man. They're going to these transformational festivals. This is attracting millions of people. And Burning Man is the largest and best known of about 800 to 1,000 of these transformational festivals that go on. And a transformational festival is basically a multi-day outdoor, countercultural, immersive event where people come to camp out. They create a temporary community, and they seek personal and planetary oneness through art, music, and various spiritual practices. Mm-hmm. And it's very huge now. You have a ton of these different festivals. You have Burning Man, Lightning in a Bottle, Lucidity Festival, Symbiosis Gathering, Shambhala Gathering. There's just a ton of these different festivals that go on around the world. They're usually on the west coast of Canada and the US. They're in Europe too, and South America. And people come to these festivals to kind of create transformation. The whole name implies what kind of transformation they're getting. Well, they're trying to break through the self-limiting thoughts they have in their head, kind of like when someone wants to go skydiving or firewalking, and they want to do something radical to kind of break that wall and be able to have that personal transformation. They want to experience a sense of awakening in themselves, a higher consciousness, and they'll often do that through meditation or yoga, ecstatic dance, shamanic practices, tantra, psychedelics. They want to have this new spiritual experience and emotional experience.
Isn't one of them called Tomorrowland as well too?
That's a big music festival.
Okay.
Yeah, but what's happening now in the world of music festivals is that a lot of the parts that we're going to get into with these transformational festivals are joining with the music festivals, the visionary artwork.
They're syncretizing together.
Absolutely. They're fusing to become an immersive event. So these transformational festivals like Burning Man or Lightning in a Bottle are very immersive events, and they give you different workshops and artwork, that visionary artwork, electronic dance music, all these things we're going to discuss how they come together. Now they're doing that in other areas like Tomorrowland. So in Tomorrowland, the stage is art. The stage is part of the experience. And the whole atmosphere over there is not just a music concert like it was. Now it's becoming almost a spiritual or immersive artistic kind of thing. So people who go to these things, they describe them as life-changing. They're transformative. The majority of people who go to these transformational events like Burning Man or these different ones will say that they identify as being spiritual but not religious. Mm-hmm. Really important to understand the mindset. Yeah. And they have a bunch of workshops. A lot of them are hosted by different cult groups or people with occult leanings, Eastern mystical spirituality. And it's what people do. They go away for several days. It's kind of like almost like a spiritual retreat, an emotional retreat, and they come back a bit transformed.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, as we kind of delve into this, is that a lot of what you see, I've observed that Burning Man, a lot of these transformational festivals, they're almost sort of like the Mount Sinai when it comes to or the Mount of Transfiguration, where they kind of go to sort of get all their info and have this transfigurative experience, and they then go into all the world. So sort of an inverted Great Commission.
Well, what's fascinating about what you're saying is the desert is often a place of transformation. Think about Jesus went out to the desert 40 days. Muhammad in the desert, he had his spiritual experience. Moses with the children of Israel, the desert is that place of transformation. Yeah. So what they do is the organizations create an event that the attendees basically fill with these different workshops and art pieces and different events. Yeah. So it kind of takes off from there. In understanding it, how we're going to approach this is we're going to look at some of the streams that have come together to kind of create transformational culture. Yeah. The streams that I identify, you have outdoor festival culture, entheogens, visionary artwork, electronic dance music, counterculture, and alternative forms of spirituality. And you have these 6 different streams that have come together. As far as outdoor festivals, a lot of this stuff started in 1970s and 1972 with what you call the Rainbow Gathering. So you had the Rainbow Family of Living Light, and they would meet in American forests, and they would do that every July. They would escape the worlds of capitalism, mass media, and the consumerism, what they called Babylon, kind of like from the Rastafarian term, like, that's our mainstream culture. So they want to get out and kind of have, like you said, this kind of utopic event, this temporary community where they get away from things.
So the origin story is somewhat around the Woodstock era, is what you're saying.
Right. And then you had Altamont, Monterey, Woodstock in the late 60s as these festivals. But then you kind of had this whole thing with the Rainbow Family. So they went out there and they had these events which were definitely countercultural. They're hippie kind of gatherings. But at the same time, they definitely had spiritual elements. They would do breath work, prayer, tantra. They had a big Om chanting ceremony, different forms of Native American spirituality. So, little money changed hands at these festivals. People did silence, and prayer, meditation for world peace. And it was definitely that kind of transformational thing. So it was kind of like a big family communion love fest, kind of like Woodstock, but at the same time it had spiritual overtones. And it definitely was about worldview changing through some of the spirituality as well.
Awesome. And so, it's just interesting, too, when it comes to the aspects of Burning Man, what's being normalized as a byproduct of it. I mean, back in 2018, when we had just kicked off our very first episode ever on the New Age, is that we were talking with Stephen Bancars, and he started to mention ayahuasca. And in the back of my mind, I had no idea what it was, so I kind of smiled, nodded in the back of my head. I'm like, what's ayahuasca? And of course, now that's become a normalized term. You see it normalized through Aaron Rodgers, who plays for the Green Bay Packers, now the New York Jets, but also just recently, by the time we release this, we may be past, the elections. We're on the cusp of the next 2024 election. Donald Trump was just on the Lex Fridman podcast. And what is Lex Fridman? He actually brought up the role of psychedelics, that should be normalized. And Lex was mentioning that he had just gone down to South America to have this very life transformative psychedelic ceremony. So something that you only heard in passing, you're now seeing normalized on one of the biggest podcasts in the world with one of the presidential candidates running for office.
So exactly what it is. Just like New Age kind of became more mainstream, this whole thing with paganism and transformational festivals is moving out of the counterculture more into the mainstream. And the different elements we're going through. So the outdoor festivals is more accepted. The next one we'll talk about is entheogens. What is an entheogen?
Right.
Well, it basically comes from the Greek en meaning in, theos, God, meaning God within, and genesthai, become. So it's basically becoming God from within.
Yeah.
And these are certain categories of drugs, hallucinogenic, psychoactive drugs that are used in shamanic or religious ritual contexts. And they're basically gives you spiritual visions, ecstatic experience. It's a way of really communicating with God in a sense. So a lot of these people who do the psychedelics say they actually have legit spiritual experiences. Obviously, in our Christian worldview, they're looking at it wrong, but they play an important part in this visionary artwork, electronic dance music, festival culture, and that's what entheogens are. So there's different chemicals now that scientists have been able to isolate in some of these naturally growing entheogens, and then they'll be able to isolate it, make synthetic drugs out of it. So ayahuasca, like you said, the active chemical in there that scientists have figured is DMT. And that's referred often as the God molecule, the DMT molecule, the spirit molecule, because those who are on it have such profound experiences. It creates that deep spirit experience where a lot of even atheists are even able to start believing in God after doing DMT. So they actually say they connect with the spiritual world. It's usually made as a drink or a brew, but it just takes you into a crazy, crazy spiritual journey. Magic mushrooms, psilocybin is a psychedelic produced in over 200 species of mushrooms, and it's been used as a plant medicine, shamanic rituals for probably a couple thousand years, if not more. And people achieve visions, trance states, and that's also taken as a tea. You have peyote, it's a cactus. The shamans used to connect to the spirit world. Bufotoxins, bufos, which is the venom on some of the certain frogs. We've talked about that in the previous episodes.
Well, one of the things I want to just talk about, because this is a worldview that goes back to what the first Christians were dealing with in the first century. And one thing that's very interesting is that Jeff Durbin years ago was reached out to when he was a chaplain at Calvary Addiction Drug and Recovery Center. He was a chaplain there. And the History Channel had a feature called The Stone Age with Dean Norris, who played Hank from Breaking Bad. And one of the things they emphasized in this is that psychedelic substances have been used all throughout ancient civilizations And it served as a way to get someone into an altered state of consciousness to tap into the unknown. So they had sought out Jeff to get a Christian perspective on it. So what's very interesting is a lot of times when you look at these transformational festivals, even the normalization of psychedelics, this is an area where they kind of see this as modernity. This is something that's brand new that no one's ever discovered before. But the reality is a lot of what we're talking about, there's nothing new under the sun. This has been going on for a very, very long time, even going back to the first century when Christians were handling this.
Absolutely.
Or encountering this.
Yep. And now one of the big ones of choice is MDMA, which you have ecstasy, which is more of a pill form. You have Molly, which is more of a crystal one. It's a psychoactive drug. It's similar to peyote in a lot of it has minor psychedelic properties, but it's not technically entheogen, but it's what they call an empathogen. So it creates this euphoria, this feeling of closeness with others, this more tactile experience. So when you're in electronic dance music, it's kind of the drug of choice. You have this sense of oneness with everybody else, this deep connection. You did mention how, there's a history of a lot of this drug stuff. Well, the Native Americans used to use ayahuasca and magic mushrooms and peyote and a lot of these things. And the Native Americans, you had the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Inca people who would have different trance states and spiritual experiences. Kind of funny, I was thinking about this. The Mayans, they were deep into a lot of these plant medicines and toad venoms and stuff, but they were also into human sacrifice too. So it's like, what kind of enlightenment were they getting that they had to kind of turn around and do human sacrifice? They're having all these trips to connect with spirituality, but then they're going to go sacrifice, their fellow man. It's kind of trippy.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of this drug stuff goes back to the ancient Greeks and the Eleusinian mysteries. They had these secret ceremonies with Kyokin. It was another psychogenic drink, and the shamans almost always used it. So moving quickly along, we also have the visionary artwork. And visionary artwork is a huge thing in transformational culture. It's also part of the concert scene now and EDM. It shows kind of a sense of consciousness, a peek into that whole spiritual world it can be. It kind of shows you, shamanism, higher consciousness, visionary journeys, this cosmic oneness with the universe. Often, you'll have a woman sitting there in a meditative position with her chakras being opened. Yeah. It's all this. It's the psychedelic art, and this artwork is usually done under the influence of psychedelic drugs like ayahuasca. Yeah. So there's a whole category called ayahuasca art, and people will do these things. So it kind of is a kind of spiritualized art.
Yeah, I think that, just so you know too, when people look on Instagram, they look at just what's going on at every single Burning Man. You see a lot of people are really encapsulated or just wondering what's going on with the art going on behind that specific type of architecture that just gets set up in a very short amount of time, and that is related to psychedelic artwork, and that's usually the catalyst that creates that. They're always very unique with how they all look.
So they do it right. They do it through art, kind of this visionary art showing that expanded state of consciousness, this mind-bending trip. They can do it with EDM, this kind of hypnotic thing we're going to talk about. It's done in different ways to get you there. The drugs, the entheogens. So two of the big pioneers in it were Allison and Alex Gray, and they would go on these sacramental journeys. They met after they were doing psychedelics, and they'd come out and they paint this really crazy artwork. Yeah. So this whole visionary art is another big stream of it. Then you have, of course, EDM. And EDM is a kind of music that was designed when synthesizers came out, technology, drum machines, and now they can get this kind of hypnotic beat where they kind of morphed the music, mixed it, and they kind of draw you in. And people would say, "Oh, my chakras are opening up on the dance floor." Yeah. So you're under. You might be taking ecstasy and you're having this empathic experience with the beat going on and on and on with 1,000 people going there and the music just transitioning. And, it's definitely, there's a spiritual side to it. They brought into visionary artwork into a lot of these events. And what had happened is these drugs and these psychedelics became such a big thing at these rave parties. They'd hold them in these big warehouses in the 90s. Politicians and the police got aware of this. So they started busting these rave parties. And then, it became more of a secret underground thing. So they started moving them outdoors to, different places. They'd tell you at the last minute, okay, we're going to meet over here. Yeah. And because there's a lot of drugs, and they didn't want to take that away. And when they did that, now you start to see how this is tying into these outdoor festivals. So these rave parties with the drugs and this oneness, it's almost like they're sacred music of this culture. Now they moved it outside. Now it's combining with outdoor festivals and the culture is all kind of coming together to converge.
Yeah. I just want to say, as you kind of go to the next screenshot, is that one of the things you sent me as a way to kind of prep and have this discussion, you sent me this 3-part documentary series called Bloom, and it does expound upon this, just with a lot of different footage. And even one of the things they talk about on top of the the EDM music is the ecstatic dancing. And we've even had someone on the podcast before who was involved with that. In fact, it came to a point where she lost control and other things were taking over her. And she ended up having she has substantial injuries in her arms and shoulders and health issues just because of like the physical toll that took of having to sort of the never-ending journey to achieve oneness. So it's just something that there's a lot of things that are interconnected regarding this discussion. Super fascinating.
It all comes together. So yeah, I'm definitely following along with my slides. There's so much information to keep me on track and so I don't leave stuff off.
For sure.
So I say in my notes, there's a number of subcultures that have come together to create Burning Man and transformational culture. You got rave culture, tech culture, primitive culture, new age culture, hippie culture, queer culture, nudist culture, business culture, pagan culture. All these different cultures kind of come together with these other elements together, this ecstatic dance and the Entheogens of visionary art. They all come together to create this outdoor festival culture. And there's also countercultural themes of anti-capitalism, anti-government, anti-traditional religion. That would be Christianity, right? They're like free love, Eastern spirituality. So you have the EDM, Entheogens, psychedelics, pagan spirituality.
And all this was sort of like the foundational kindling to kind of get the fires raging to sort of create the demand for the marketplace of what created Burning Man.
Well, what's interesting about these transformational festivals is they talk, like Burning Man says, all we're doing is we're creating a petri dish or blank canvas. So we're not telling you what kind of events are going to go there. We just create the place, and then you have all these things kind of rising spontaneously, these different events. And then in these events, you have workshops and different EDM parties and all this stuff. Some stuff's so vile we can't even talk about it on here. I mean, it's pretty crazy the stuff that goes on there. So, and the last thing of these extremes I'm talking about is the idea of worldviews. Often Christians are really good at identifying, theism and atheism, polytheism, pantheism, but we really need to update the worldview catalog and include paganism. And paganism it's not just like the unevangelized, the pagans. We're talking paganism with a capital P, and that comes from the Latin paganus, meaning someone who's rural or a country dweller. It's kind of like heathen. Those are on the heaths who are the last to get evangelized. And it's definitely spirituality. So Christians really got to kind of understand this is the underlying spirituality. It's definitely New Age and postmodern elements in these transformational festivals and Burning Man, but the underlying spirituality really seems to be pagan. And a really good working definition as Christians to learn this stuff is it's a pantheistic, polytheistic nature religion. I mentioned that on an earlier episode on the new cults, but it's something we really got to get in. This is where it starts to come home when we're looking at movements like this, seeing it through that lens as a pantheistic, polytheistic nature religion. And under the umbrella, it's basically paganism is an umbrella movement. Pagans do not believe or even worship Satan. It's a nature religion, it's an earth religion, a nature spirituality. They believe in the divinity of man and nature, and everything's divine. It's different from New Age. There's like some of them would, the ancient Norse gods, the ancient Saxon gods, the Canaanites, even the Old Testament. What was Ashtaroth? She was a fertility god or goddess. So this is like the indigenous spirituality of the land. And Christianity came and it stomped out paganism and replaced it with monotheism. So where in paganism you'd have like the god of the river, the god of the harvest, the god of the moon, the god of the sun. Christianity came and showed, no, there's this one God, and, he's sovereign over everything, and it's not, we're just catering to that. So in the worldview of paganism, it talks about seasonal cycles of the sun and the moon, festivals like solstices and equinoxes, symbols honoring fertility, rebirth, sacred spaces like altars and shrines to various deities, beliefs in gods and goddesses and spirits, sometimes even fairies. And they really believe in like tapping into like natural medicines and herbs to unleash the power of nature for these rituals and divination and magic and spells and healing. So this is a thing. We don't want to confuse it with New Age. New Age is really different because they both believe in the oneness of all things, like I've played in the show before, but the basic problem in New Age is that we've forgotten that we're really God inside. So we're supposed to use our crystals and our channeling and all these things to kind of get in touch with our inner deity or divinity. But with paganism, our problem is our basic man has forgotten his interconnectedness with nature. This is nature's divine. We got to kind of get back to that. So they both believe in the oneness. New Age is the idea of manifesting that outward reality. They kind of look more within themselves. Paganism says no. The physical world's really real.
And just from a visual worldview, and just from a visual worldview, just to kind of reciprocate what you're saying, most people haven't been to Burning Man, many people, a lot of our audience have seen the two Avatar films have come out, potentially in 3D, which is the best way to see it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, what you see, that's where you see a lot of that worldview very, very heavily. That's what it is.
The tree, the earth tree,
exactly. All of that interconnected, all is divine, all is one.
So it's definitely in culture. So pagans, they want to connect to the nature. They want to connect to their deities, their ancestors, and to the earth. And it's a whole different way of thinking. So what are some contemporary forms of paganism? Well, you got Wicca, which is also neo-paganism, Druidism or Celtic paganism, shamanism, heathenism, generic paganism. You got indigenous religions like Native American spirituality, voodoo, Santeria. So those are all different forms of paganism. So these are the different streams. You got the visionary artwork, you got electronic dance music, counterculture, all these different forms coming together, outdoor festival culture, and that's what's making up Transformational Festival and Burning Man.
Yeah, and I think even though what I really love is that I love this part of it, and Carl Teichert has done a really good job of just summarizing what it is, because many people from the outside looking in, they're trying to find words. It's almost like you're living in a different time capsule. And if you see like an airplane, if you've never seen an airplane or something before, you're going to try and describe what you're seeing with only the things that you know.
Your point of reference.
Yeah. And so many people are trying to describe Burning Man, but not really understand the foundations of it, and are only using points of references
you're so right.
In between.
I mean, it's notoriously difficult to explain Burning Man to someone who hasn't, been there. Kind of like the blind man with the elephant, where one man feels a leg, he thinks it's a tree, or the trunk, it's a snake, or the side, it's the wall. Yeah. It's like they're all different limited views, but Burning Man is really, really hard to understand. So we're going to try to flesh that out a bit, explain festival culture, because everybody knows someone now has been to Burning Man, and it's such a big event, but it's only, like I said, one out of almost 1,000 of these festivals, and this is where it's at today. This drawing in millions of people. And if you were not a Christian, I mean, you might want to go yourself, because it's a lot of ways, it's a good time, it's a lot of partying and closeness with people, but from a Christian perspective, there's a lot of darkness going on at these festivals.
And just for the sake of clarity, you're not someone who's from the outside looking in. You have been there.
Absolutely.
So you're speaking from experience.
And I've done deep research. I've talked to, I think, literally every major figure in the history of Burning Man. I've been gathering available materials on him. So a lot of burners would say, what does he know about Burning Man? I've done a lot of sweat equity on this to really kind of get to the bottom of it and be able to describe it and to critique it as well from a Christian point of view.
Excellent. So with all that being said, what is Burning Man?
So I've got my working definition. I'll read it. Burning Man is an annual week-long festival from people from all over the world go to build a temporary city in a harsh desert environment in order to participate in creating and experiencing art, community, and spirituality with radical self-expression without judgment. And they basically come together, they build this temporary giant city called Black Rock City in northwestern Nevada. And it's in the shape of a giant horseshoe. It's like this futuristic city with a giant wooden figure dead center in the middle on a 40-foot base. He's a 40-foot man. The lake bed, it's probably the largest flat surface anywhere in North America. And it's built on this giant sulfuric kind of ply dust lake bed. And it's pretty rough, man, because like when I was at Burning Man, every morning I'd wake up, I'd be spitting blood because all that alkaline dust gets into your lungs, it gets into your electronics. People joke around on the playa that you'll find, playa dust like 5 years later in your van or somewhere. It just doesn't go away. It's this yellow kind of crazy dust.
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of people caught people's attention last year in Burning Man 2023 when it was
a bad year.
When it looked literally like Woodstock. I mean, you could play Jefferson
Airplane
the
later
background.
Woodstock. Yeah. So it's this giant lake bed, and it's got really rough conditions, dust storms. So people wear like goggles and a bandana, so they're not breathing in this alkaline dust. You're cut off from the outside world. There's no electricity. There's no water. There's very little cell phone internet. You're away from your friends and family. You're kind of roughing it. It's a real exercise in survival. So temperatures can swing way over 100 degrees on that desert lake bed till at night it gets really, really cold and you're camping out. There's nothing you can buy or sell at Burning Man except ice and coffee. I guess those are two essentials, right? People can't go without their coffee. And it's a gift economy, they call it. So basically, it's no sponsored events. It's all just, people just, you go in there to gift and build that different culture on there. As far as people who attend Burning Man, a lot of the big cultural leaders go. Elon Musk was there again this year. He had supposedly a great time out there. Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google, they picked their CEO because he was a burner. The first Google Doodle, those little designs they show on the Google homepage, the first one ever was Burning Man. Building 42 on the Google campus for the longest time was all dedicated to Burning Man and stuff. They give
that's what you're seeing in the display right
people
there.
off. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's definitely there. A lot of the big celebrities, and you've gone there too. My little slide here, I'm looking at Sting and Will Smith and Katy Perry, Robin Williams, Cindy Crawford, Susan Sarandon, Chris Rock, Jared Leto. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
I was going to say Jared Leto. That's no surprise at all.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a Diddy, Adam Lambert. I mean, it's just Todd Rundgren, goes on and on and on. So they build this giant figure. He doesn't really have a meaning, and he's a big wooden man on a wooden base, and the base often is the theme every year. They have different annual themes. They have theme camps. So when you set up a camp, you're going to live at this camp with your buddies, or it could be a geodesic dome, an RV. They're going to have their camps with the big RVs and catered chef events. So people are saying that's such a corporatizing of Burning Man. It's not the real message of survival, getting out there and kind of living like, against the elements and doing that. They have these big, they fly in, and there's a local airport like right there, and they'll just fly in, they'll live in the RV, they have a whole staff, and they just go ride around and experience it. It's kind of it kind of goes against the original message of Burning Man. So there's a lot of critics about that. Yeah. So you have a week-long event. Saturday night, they come together to burn the man, this giant wooden fingers. So they they build them. This isn't the man, but it's the kind of, an idea of what it is. This giant man, and at the end, his arms are up at night, and they have all lit up with neon. They have all these fire dancers and this huge drum corps and people pounding music, and they're partying and running around naked and drinking and going crazy, and they burn the man, and it's a big event where everyone's partying. That's Saturday night. Sunday night, they close out, they burn the temple. Now, Burning Man since the year 2000 has created a spiritual temple. It's a spiritual center place of Burning Man. Yeah. The temple, these are beautiful structures. They're unique every year. When I was there, it was a massive building with 5 different sections. Yeah. And, people go to the temple to contemplate their losses and stuff. We'll explain a little bit. I'll explain that right now. So basically, when you lose somebody, like in the previous burn, just say you lost your mother, you might take her ashes and put it in that temple. One of your relationships comes to an end. You'll write the name of your former love on the side of the temple with a Sharpie. Yeah. Your child dies. You'll take your child's toy to put it into the temple. Your brother got killed in a war, you'll bring his dog tags. Yeah. So you'll take all these significant things in your life, and then when the temple gets burned on Sunday, it's complete silence. Yeah. No coughing. You got like 80,000 people there, and it's just hearing the pop of the wood, and people are sitting there crying. And what's happening is when they burn the temple, what they're trying to do is they're trying to create this healing experience, kind of like the Japanese boats where they write things, little names, and then they put it in the water and they send it off to burn. You're kind of making this break. So when those photographs of the lost person gets consumed in that burning temple, you get that emotional healing and a break that happens. But the problem with the burners is they think this is spiritual healing. It's a difference between emotional healing and spiritual healing from a Christian point of view. Yeah, you might feel like a sense of closure on something through pain, but that doesn't mean you're getting closer to God who made you or the creator. Yeah.
Or even to just, true. And even if you talk about just looking at ancient rituals, I mean, the ones that I would a lot more identify with is just what the Vikings would do when someone would die and you see them, they send somebody out in a boat and, with a sword or whatever, and they take the fire arrow and, fire it off in the distance, and the boat catches on fire, and that's sort of the grief ritual as well, too. But yeah, that's something that is I've always observed with those who come from this background, there's a lot of usually, they're very emotionally sensitive. They usually have a background of a lot of trauma and difficulty and hardship, which usually allures people into this type of spirituality. And then you're having some sort of object, whether it's like a letter or a toy or all these things. And it's like tons of just scores of people all at once who are looking for healing regarding this. So just the gravitas of that for me as a Christian just shows just the importance to see this as a mission field for those like Carl and those who've gone out to reach these people. I think it's not only one of the most important mission demographics, like Wally would say the person next door, but also probably one of the most misunderstood.
Yeah, and it's like when I was out in the temple, I remember there was a girl who was over there, she's probably like 22, and she was just weeping. And I asked her, I said, why are you crying at the temple? She goes, I've had a loss. And I said, what was your loss? And she goes, I just found out I have cancer. Her loss was herself. And she was crying there. And I said, listen, this event is kind of this idea of this pagan spirituality, but I want you to know there is a God who loves you, a God who's personal, a God who can hear you. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And, I had a chance to pray with her and talk to her at the temple because there's a place of, I don't want to exploit it, but I'd also want to at the same time show, yes, you're not alone in this cold, dark universe. There's actually, a personal God, not this impersonal kind of concept. So these temples have different themes. You'll have, following the annual theme often, they have the Temple of Transition, the Temple of Juno. That's like the pagan two-faced god, right? Lightning in a Bottle Festival, for years, they also had a Temple of Consciousness, and that was kind of a spiritual center over there. So it definitely has that spiritual element. So you have the man who burns Saturday, they close it out, you kind of leave with that kind of spiritual feeling. Sunday night as the temples burn, and that's kind of the closure of the event. What goes on at Burning Man? Well, you experience, like I said, community with your fellow burners. They're very loving, inclusive. You'll go up to these camps. They'll come on over. It's so hot. Bring your own cup. They'll say BYOC. You'll have drinks and you'll hang out and meet new friends and stuff. It's a very inclusive, loving event. There's no economy. They share over there. When you get to the playa, that's the desert lake bed where it's held. They say, welcome home when you come on there. So they kind of turn reality in its head. And they talk about like our day-to-day life right here is called the default world. But when you're at the burn, you're coming home. So now you're back home. It's kind of funny because that Rainbow Gathering group, the first of the outdoor festivals, what's their website? welcomehome.org. When you're to witchcraft and some of these pagan things, they'll often talk about welcome home. So that whole kind of pagan spirituality about coming home is kind of really interesting. So when you go to Burning Man, you get to become an artist for a week. You get to dress crazy. You can paint yourself blue, go out like a lobster, put a TV set in your head. People walk around naked. It's just this whole alternate identity. You get a playa name often. Just take some funny name. They'll start calling you. And you're in this big community of fellow burners, these adventurers. And, our culture often restricts artwork. And there you get to become an artist for a week. So whether it's like building a giant steel structure of a 18-wheeler cab up 40 feet up in the air, or the flaming octopus that roams around on wheels at the burn, or all these crazy things, giant buildings and giant Angry Bird setups. You can pull the elastic and shoot your bird. I mean, all kinds of crazy art, art installations, displays. You can become an artist. And, you ride around on bicycles. They also have what they call art cars and mutant vehicles. And you have to drive around slowly because all the people there. But it's such a massive event that you don't even get to see the whole event. You only see a tiny part of it. You got like this giant horseshoe-shaped thing with, temporary city of 80,000 people. And even in the course of a week, you might only see a fraction of it. So you go there and you become an artist, and you also get transformed. They have these theme camps we talked about. Some are like sexually based. Some might be a disco party. There's stuff that goes on at these events because this kind of audience I can't even describe, because it's so X-rated, because anything goes. That's their idea of radical self-expression. But, as tame as we can describe it. So they'll have the annual themes. Some of the annual Burning Man themes over the years, for example, 2004 is called the Vault to Heaven. That was their annual theme. 2007, the Green Man. That's a pagan concept. Look that one up. 2009, Evolution. 2011, Rite of Passage. 2019, Metamorphosis. And 2020 was the Multiverse. And then you'll have biannual themes at the Boom Festival, which is the biggest festival in Europe. And they would have 2010, the annual theme was water. 2012, alchemy. 2016, shamanism. 2018, sacred geometry. So those are very kind of pagan-y themes. The temple, as I said, is definitely a spiritual tool. So that's where you kind of have it. Why do people go to Burning Man? Well, there's three reasons I have why people kind of go there. Your food tastes horrible. It's full of this playa dust. You don't have electricity. You got to get time off work and away from friends. You get sunburned. It can rain, like you said, and then you get stuck in the mud, and you have the exodus you're trying to leave, and you're stuck out for hours. It's absolutely exercise in survival, and it's not meant for everyone. It's for it's a serious grind. The three reasons people go there, even though it's crazy, they'll drive past, like I said, 1,500 churches in their RVs from across the country. It costs quite a bit of money to eventually go to pack all your food and generators and all the stuff you need, water. People go there for three real reasons. They go as a blow-off valve. So there's a thing called techno-pagans. A lot of these programmers in Silicon Valley like to sit in their cubicles and do coding, and then they like to go out for a week and just go crazy and party, and just as a blow-off mechanism of all the stress they have in their life.
Well, even when you talk about expenditures, what was very interesting that you told me is that this past year, Burning Man 2024 is one of the lowest attended, which Carl was saying.
First time in 13 years
just because of the economy with inflation and stuff like that.
Because the gas is so high. So just say you have to drive 1,500 miles from New York to Nevada or wherever, how many miles that is. That's a lot of gas stops in RV where you get 5-7 miles a gallon, and it's becoming cost prohibitive. So Burning Man since 2011 has sold it every year. It was fanatical. Like in 2011 when it sold out, tickets on eBay and Craigslist were going for $1,400. Whatever, back then, they're now they're about $575, and then you had the parking and everything. But back then it was like $300 and some dollars, and then tickets would go for many times face value. And you're not supposed to, Burning Man culture, to make profit off it. But so now it's taken a heavy hit also, because with COVID, the pandemic, it was shut down for a couple of years. So they had to do it virtually, and they had a theme of multiverse. So they basically created these different worlds, and you can get your avatar, and then you can navigate, watch the man burn, watch the temple burn, go to a different workshop. They did a really good job. So they kind of adapted. So reason number one people go to the burn is they want to do this blow-off valve and go out there and party and have a crazy life. Number two, they really do like the community, to be an artist and the spirituality. They want to get away from their job. It's just kind of like the retreat, their vacation. And the third reason is they really believe in the concept of the 10 principles. So the 10 principles is, Larry Harvey came that in 2004, and these are kind of it's not the 10 commandments, but there's kind of 10 things that they do at Burning Man. And basically, really quick, they're basically radical inclusion, gifting, that's the gift economy where nothing's bought and sold, decommodification, radical self-reliance, so you're kind of just doing that grind on the playa. Radical self-expression, that's where anything goes. Some really immoral stuff or weird spirituality. It's experimentation. Communal effort, civic responsibility, leave no trace, participation. So they say there are no observers of Burning Man, everybody's a participant, and immediacy. The ones we're really concerned with, the Christians, is the radical self-expression, where you can go and just do crazy things. So basically, it opens you up to experimentation, where you go and try new kinds of spirituality. It changes your worldview, and you come back just different. So it's you talk about some of these large group awareness training things where you meet in hotels for 2 weekends in a row, and then you have your lecturer come out. That's supposed to, they say, we're going to tear you down and put you back together again. And that would do that worldview shift, that you kind of look at life differently. That's the danger of Burning Man. It's not just a fun event. It's not just an art event. It definitely has spiritual implications that as Christians, we don't, want our loved ones going to become pagans with this kind of crazy worldview shifting ability with all these workshops and everything that go on.
Right. And it's not just about some people just going there. It's about understanding when it comes our way, when we're dealing with the fallout of those who go to it, and then we're affected.
Discernment.
Yes.
Not just buying in, it's a great art. It's an art festival, but it's also a spiritual festival. It's a lot of things. Burning Man, all these transformational festivals. So what's the right way to think about Burning Man? Well, there was some magazine, Christian magazine, years ago, they talked about there's 50,000 people going out into the middle of the desert to worship Satan. Well, that's a kind of a cray-cray kind of view. It's not what it is. They're not worshiping Satan deliberately. Some people, or the cheerleaders, say it's the greatest thing in the world. So as Christians, how do we, just like you said, how do we look at it? How do we assess these transformational festivals in a balanced way without being kooks, but without being overly sympathetic to it? There's definitely a lot of interesting things at Burning Man. You will see artwork like you don't see anywhere in the world. You can look at that online. You get to tip into your creativity. God, I always say, look at this world we live in. It's an amazing world. God is the great artist, the paintbrush and the sky and the landscape stuff. It's an amazing world we're blessed with. Well, we're creating God's image. So if he's the great artist, we have that artistic, part of ourselves. We need a theology of aesthetics, I think I've often said. And you go there, you definitely have that, great side, but you also have a very dark side. So how did Burning Man start? Let's do a history of Burning Man. So Burning Man basically started with Larry Harvey. Larry Harvey died in 2018. He lived in San Francisco near the Burning Man headquarters, where he was executive director of Burning Man. And he would often portray himself, Jeremiah, as the sole creative person, the visionary to kind of make Burning Man what it is. But he was actually influenced by a lot of other sources, which he never gave credit to. He kind of wrote them out of history and kind of took a lot of credit for himself. A lot of the critics have said that. Larry, just like one of the guy who started building temples, the great temple builder, David Best, Larry was an atheist just like him, but he also somehow believed in the world of spirit. And the roots of Burning Man, there was a group in San Francisco called Communiversity where they would kind of offer free education. And some of the people from that joined a group called the Suicide Club. And the Suicide Club was a really interesting group. They were like a prank group. They were a countercultural group. It started in San Francisco in 1977. And they would just do really crazy, adventurous things. Funny things. They do things to make political statements. They would do things like bridge climbing, like the Oakland Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge, really risky stuff, or abandoned buildings. They would have 30 members ride around the San Francisco cable cars completely nude.
Oh, wow.
Or they would do infiltrations like of different cults and groups like Unification Church or the American Nazi Party, just like crazy experimental stuff. And then, in 1982, they kind of fizzled out after, Gary Warren passed away the next year. And then they came back as a different group called the Cacophony Society in 1986. So a lot of these were former members of Suicide Club. And this definitely led into the formation of Burning Man. So there's a lot of other similarities. They would do really funny, street theater, urban pranks. They would do a thing one time where they had a bus, where they'd have like a clown get on the bus. Then next stop, another clown would get on the bus, and the baby's not even acknowledging each other. Another clown, and all of a sudden there's like 20 clowns on the bus in rush hour, and people say, "What the heck is this?" Just like funny, crazy stuff like that for fun. They would do these zone trips where they would go out into explore different areas, and that kind of finds its way right into the very fabric of Burning Man. So Burning Man a lot of the roots is there was Baker Beach in San Francisco was a big hippie hangout and electronic dance music kind of scene was there. There was an artist called Mary Grauberger, and she would host these spontaneous art happenings where she'd build this artwork and she'd burn it right there on the beach. And Larry Harvey's old girlfriend was one of her students, and he would go to these different art burnings on the beach, and obviously this affected Larry.
Yeah.
He also would be really into the book, The Golden Bow. This was a really famous book by Sir James Fraser. Big, thick, giant book written in 1890. And he would talk about different religious mythology, rituals, and beliefs across cultures. One of the really notable parts of this was he would talk about the Wicker Men.
Yeah.
And Wicker Men were these giant, and we'll get to the movie.
Yeah,
I know you're a movie guy like me, but the Wicker Men, that's where it came from. They build these giant...
It's a remake.
They build these giant, kind of wicker structures, and they would put people in there to sacrifice. It was often done by the Druids, that pagan group.
Hey, let me add this on top of this. In the same way how you can't really understand Burning Man unless you've been there, I don't think you can truly understand even the background of these people unless you've actually been to San Francisco. And as someone, the last time I was in San Francisco was 2010, but just knowing the atmosphere, having riding a bike across the Golden Gate Bridge, and even kind of growing up in that area in Northern California, it almost seeing these stories and having it fit in San Francisco, there's almost part of me that just makes sense. Just seeing that slide of the Golden Gate Bridge and you talking about that, me having been to that exact location, it feels like
it's very real.
I can feel and smell that area.
Yeah, 100%. San Francisco is definitely a countercultural mecca. So you have all these things coming together to form, Larry's thinking. When Mary Grauberger built her artwork and burned on the beach, he was reading that Golden Bow book with stories of Wicker Men. He used to carry that around. And then he used to watch Wicker Man movie. Now, he would say, "Oh, I'd never heard of Wicker Man movie," but I've talked to his roommate. He goes, "We watched it 20 times together." He was a big fan of that. And it basically told the story. It was a 1973 British horror movie where this Christian conservative policeman goes to investigate this island in the Scottish Isles where this little girl is missing. And when he goes there, he finds this really weird pagan culture doing pagan rituals with animal heads and different, things, and doing their solstices and stuff.
Right.
Spoiler, at the end, this policeman, fast forward if you don't want to hear this, the policeman is put inside this giant wicker figure and he's burned at the end there. Now, Burning Man obviously doesn't have that violent element, but, it was an influence to Larry Harvey doing that. So fast forward, we got all these things in Larry's head. So fast forward, the very first burn happened in 1986 on Baker Beach. And Larry Harvey, with his carpenter friend Jerry James, they decide they're going to build this 8-foot wooden figure along with Michael Hopkins.
And geographically, Baker Beach, that's in San Francisco.
Right near Golden Gate Bridge.
Right around the Bay
You can
Area.
see Golden Gate Bridge right off it.
Okay.
And that's that kind of hippie place where they used to hang out. It's like they had a nude beach close by, and they're burning the art. And it was some of the major EDM stuff was out there too. So they built this 8-foot wooden figure, And Larry Harvey used to say this was a spontaneous act of self-expression that needed no justification. He just did this out of the blue. And he went and they just had a group of 20 people they gathered around, and on the solstice, they just burned his figure, and that was it. Well, they did it the following year too. They met on the following year solstice. Now the man grew to 15 feet, and now 80 people showed up this time. So every year this mat was getting a bit bigger and bigger, and it started drawing more attention because there was some rich places by the cliffs. They looked down. We don't want fires to be burning on our beach. So they kind of called the police. In 1988, the police showed up. And but what was really important is that the Cacophony Society was doing all this prank stuff. Well, Larry and those guys got really connected because Larry Harvey saw an ad about the Cacophony Society, and they got in touch with him and said, "Hey, why don't you guys come out to the burn?" Well, that was huge now because the cacophonists became burners, the burners became cacophonists. They kind of fused together, and a lot of the crowd, a lot of the major figures in Burning Man have been cacophony people. So remember that whole adventurous spirit where you go and try to do these otherworldly kind of events. That is part of Burning Man culture. Is coming in there. Now in 1988, the man is 30 feet tall, and there's 200 people coming to the beach, and the police came to shut it down. So the first year that the name Burning Man was actually attached to the event was 1988. So the man's getting bigger. More people are coming. 1990 was the year everything changed. The police really came. They shut it down. They said, you cannot burn the man at all. They had to basically disassemble the man. They had to find a place to do it. The Cacophony Society people said, hey, we got a place we know. We do these zone trips. Let's go burn them out in the desert.
What do you think the reason was behind the police? Was it just environmental safety reasons?
No, it's just the neighbor. Well, it's one thing. It's now the man is 30 feet tall.
Yeah.
It's not a safety regulated thing. You know how the government bureaucracy gets involved. Plus, the people were complaining about it, the rich people, this thing, and it's just, it was an unauthorized event. They didn't get their license to do it and anything.
Right,
so the police shut it down.
Makes sense.
And then they said, actually, the man was 40 feet tall in 1990. So it said, we're going to take it out to the desert. And, they found a place to do it. They went to burn them in 1990, and there's a few people who went out there. Early days of Burning Man was a crazy party. I mean, it wasn't like it is now about artwork. There was no organization. There was no structure and rules and city and 10 principles. It was people riding around in the dark at 100 miles an hour with their pedal to the metal, because the place is so huge, the playa, you could have your foot floored on a car for 10 minutes, not hit anything.
What was the screenshot? What was the last slide? It looks like you've got people holding AKs, or what's going on with that?
So basically, they had one of the events they had is a thing called Car Hunt.
Yeah.
And they would have a remote control car that they would drive, and they'd be in back of a pickup truck with semi-automatics, and they'd be blasting this car next to them. Bah, 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 bah. It was just that kind of crazy anarchy and fun. They'd be blowing stuff up, taking TVs, blowing it up, high on coke in their cars, driving 70 miles an hour in the middle of the night. So it was a big anarchy event.
Was George Miller involved in the production of this?
You could see it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, in later Burning Man, they do have a Thunderdome.
Well, just real quick before you jump in.
Yeah.
Well, just so you know too that Robert, who's on the podcast when we did back recapping 2023, he told me the early history of Burning Man was he referred to it as Mad Max. That's what it felt like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now it's become much more corporatized, but it was just total anarchy and drugs and sex and blowing stuff up. I mean, it was crazy in the early days. So Burning Man, we're tracing the evolution of it, how the Cacophony Society came in there. They gave this experimentation and partying. A lot of those people in the Car Hunt were all from the Cacophony Society.
Right.
So they'd go out there. Another stream that happened was in the early 90s. There's a group called Desert Sightworks. So these were some artists from San Francisco who would go out and create living art in the desert. And they'd do neon and stuff, John Law, William Binzen, the great guys. And they would do it a few miles away from the playa in the Black Rock Desert. Wasn't the same location. And what's really sad is William Binzen is a great artist, and he's been written right out of the history of Burning Man. He was friends with Larry Harvey for a while, and he introduced artwork to Burning Man. He took a lot of his desert site work art, he brought it to the burn, and he started attending it with other artists. And Larry, just took it off the website, took it off any acknowledgement, and it's almost again, I'm the sole creative guy. I take all the credit for the vision of Burning Man.
Yes.
So 1996 was a pivotal year because Burning Man is never advertised, it's always been by word of mouth. Wired magazine put out a cover story in Burning Man, and then now the public consciousness, hey, there's this crazy event, it goes out in the desert, we should go check. So that caused the attendance to really jump when people started hearing about this thing. The thing that was really sad had happened, 96, 3 people were killed or badly injured when a van in the darkness of night went through a tent. Then a motorcyclist was killed very close to the event, and that had a really big impact on it. So now they said, we got to protect ourselves. We got to put different laws. We got to incorporate. We got to create Black Rock City with a structured layout. And 96 is when everything started changing. It got away from the anarchy. Now it's more of an organized event, and they realized this thing's not going away. We got to build it right. So that had a huge effect on Burning Man 96. The next big change was 2000. And that's when spirituality really came to Burning Man. So you had this anarchistic event where they burned a man. Now it's becoming more structured. You have artwork added there. Now we're adding spirituality. So David Best, who I referred to, he was building the structure like a couple of weeks before Burning Man. And then his really dear friend died on a motorcycle accident. And they decide they're going to dedicate this event to his friend. And he said, anyone on the Playa who's coming here who's experienced loss, this sacred space is where you can come and kind of have a memorial thing. And it was, wasn't that giant thing, but it was a beautiful structure by David Best. And it became a spiritual place for the meet, but also that artistic part. The temples started growing bigger and bigger and bigger. Now they're incredible structures that take all year to build. I mean, in Burning Man, you're building this artwork for a year often to come either burn it at the event or just display it year after year. This is what they call Burning Man infrastructure. So these are really elaborate, beautiful temples that they have.
Well, that's what's super interesting about the structure because the designs, I know some of these are built for a year, and you saw that in the documentary, The Bloom, and even talking about other Transformational Festivals where they build this stuff. The visual appeal, it emulates structures that are long, like temples that have been around for thousands of years, but they build them up super shortly.
But what they do about it is they kind of mimic some of the geometry and angles of it, so it's not identified to any one religion, but they kind of want to make it a spiritual kind of feeling thing where you go there. So it's a sacred space, kind of like if you go to a war memorial, you kind of got that quietness when you're doing it. You kind of go in there with that solemnity and just kind of have that.
Right.
Kind of,
so it's kind of like syncretism. So let's sort of take all the different let's sort of emulate the religions, but maybe kind of take our own sacred geometry and sort of blend it all together into this artwork.
Into this pseudo-spiritual thing that you designated spiritual, like a war memorial. You kind of designated that. Now it's spiritual. You have to be hushed there and no loud laughing and talking. So 2011 was another giant event. You referred to this as the first year Burning Man sold out. Like I said, there was people are fanatical for Burning Man. They really tried to find tickets. Also, this is the time when Burning Man moves to become a nonprofit. So now it's no longer just Burning Man LLC, it's the Burning Man Project. And they're now a nonprofit. And the whole point is for Burning Man now, like you referred to this earlier, is you're going to take the message of Burning Man to the whole world. Yeah. You're going to take it off the playa. That's like a utopia blueprint of the perfect society. And now we, how people have the gift economy and they're all inclusive and expressive. Now we want to take that to the whole world and show them, hey, this is what the world should be like. And it's kind of a pseudo spiritual message, but it's also, kind of epistemologically dangerous, what they're trying to do.
Right.
The pandemic in 2020 and 2021, they burned a man in cyberspace, so that had a big impact on Burning Man. They weren't getting the money. And now with this year's burn, instead of like 80,000 people last year, they only had 60,000 this year about.
Wow.
So it's
30,000 drop off. That's
20.
Wild. 20, yeah.
20. So it was a big change, down from 80,000 people down to 60,000 people, and it's had an impact after, especially after COVID.
Yeah.
So was Larry Harvey really the sole creative mind behind Burning Man? Well, we saw from our history, he likes to present himself that way, but he had his interest in the Wicker Man stuff, was inspiring, whether in the movie or the Golden Bow. The artwork from William Binzen, his partner Judy West, said, before Desert Sightworks came along, Burning Man was just like a cocktail party for the Cacophony Society. We definitely brought the art into Burning Man. Larry Harvey never has given Desert Sightworks credit for that. David Best brought the temple to Burning Man. But what is the true story of Burning Man? Was it really started, like Larry Harvey said, like a spontaneous act of self-expression, or was it something else? Well, I talked to Larry's roommate, Michael Flash Hopkins, he lived with Larry. He had a job with Harry. The first man was built in Michael's mother's house in her garage. He knew Larry. Let's listen to what Michael Flash Hopkins said. He's like a legendary Burning Man figure, said on the real origins of Burning Man.
Larry and Jerry and I had built the first one. It's not a man, it's a woman, and her name is Patricia. And Larry was upset that she wasn't letting him see his child, and he was really upset with her, so he decided he'd build an effigy of Pat and burn her, and we decided that it wouldn't be good to do it out in front of our house. We decided it would be better if we brought it down to the beach and did it down at the beach. So we burned it because Mary Grauberger at the time was down there doing this sort of witchy-poo kind of rituals down there, sort of a Wicker Man style spring thing there, and so we decided we'd bring it down there and burn it down there. And it's never been a man, it's always been a woman. And you can just look at the shape of it and you'll notice that it has like really shapely hips. It's always been a standard joke with us because it's never been a man, it was always a woman. But we realized though, if we ever said it was a burning woman, that we'd never get any women out there. They'd think we were just He-Man women haters. And so by calling it Burning Man, girls were definitely into that. They're like, oh yeah, burn the man. And as long as the man isn't named, Matthew or something, it's like, hey, I don't care who it is, burn him. It was kind of a funny way to do it, is calling it a burning man. It was much more socially acceptable, especially in San Francisco. So it was kind of a joke, and it was a joke to begin with in one respect. It wasn't the sacredness of it all or the spiritualness of it all. We went on a journey to the sacred. He was just a little upset with Patricia and decided that he should burn her, and this would get it out of his soul or whatever. It was another way of venting his anger. And so we built Patricia in my mother-in-law's basement and took it out to the beach and burned it where Mary was burning her stuff. It didn't even look like the Wicker Man. Mary was building something that looked like the Wicker Man, but we built something that looked like Pat.
So how'd you like that? So it wasn't really even a Burning Man at all. It was like a sexist act against his, the mother of his child, where he wanted to get back at her for not letting him be able to see his kid. So he's going to burn this effigy and on her lawn. And his friends talked him out and said, hey, we don't want to get arrested. So that's the real story, Burning Man, that's covered up for all this time. It's
as
crazy.
the saying goes, truth is stranger than fiction. Tends to be.
Yeah. So that's, for all the burners who think this came out of Larry's mind, is that spontaneous act that needed no justification in Baker Beach. It was really, it comes from an act of revenge. The heart of man manifests everywhere.
History tends to be written by the victors as it goes.
Pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess we can move a little deeper into our critique. Now we're talking about the Christian response, or a response to transformational culture. That'd be Burning Man, a lot of these things. Larry Harvey, the founder of Burning Man, the president of Burning Man, he would say, we are not a religion, but we are certainly a spiritual movement. Marian Goodell, she's now the CEO of Burning Man. She says, it's a way of life. It's the way you look at yourself, Burning Man. And she's also said, if a society ever came to like a crazy part, how the Mormons talk about the United Order might save us when the Constitution's hanging by a thread. Well, she's kind of had scenarios. If society is really going sideways and falling apart, it might be us in transformational culture that saves society from itself.
You saw a lot of that articulated in that Bloom documentary too. A lot of people sort of said the same thing. This collective consciousness sort of saving society and all that.
So if listeners are hearing that, you can Google the Bloom series, and it's, I think, Bloom TV or something, and it's basically a documentary on these transformational festivals. They're really well done in a dangerous sense, because he's going to like 20 some of these festivals all around the world, portraying it in a very nice light and showing how this emerging culture is the way to save the planet and create a better paradigm society, because we've been doing it wrong in the whole capitalistic Western thinking. But it's something, if you want to see it for yourself and see what Burning Man and transformational culture is about, you might want to Google the Bloom series, and there's like 3 of them now, and they're coming out with another 12-part series maybe down the road. It was going to be a 4-part series. They actually made 3. The third one's on spirituality in these movements, but they are fascinating, well-produced series. So one of the things that's fascinating about when you study a cult or a different movement like Burning Man is it forces you to ask different questions that have never done before. Like, for example, like the World Mission Society Church of God, the cult that I do a lot on, who I'm most worried about of all groups out there. they have forced us to look at Passover and how to respond to the idea that, what Jesus did and the way of salvation is he did this, what we call the Lord's Supper. It was really an extension of Passover, and we need to do Passover to be saved. So you can't go to the commentaries to really look up how do you answer it, because no one's really asked that question before. Well, Burning Man does the same thing. Burning Man has really forced us as apologists, as counter cult watchers, what is spirituality? For a burner, anything can be spiritual. If you're out in a drum circle, like pounding away and getting your endorphin rush and going crazy and sweating and going nuts, you could say, hey, that was a really spiritual experience, man, that drum circle. Well, that's not spiritual to us. Spirituality for a Christian is a much more narrow defined way of looking at things instead of that really broad definition that these people will kind of throw it into. For us, it's communion with the Creator who made us on His ground and connecting with Him in the world of the Spirit. For burners, it could be ecstatic dance. It could be a lot of things like that. Any of those things is spiritual. They have a very wide definition. So we got to be able to reason with them somehow to say, hey, not everything is spiritual. So one line, and I think it's effective when you have someone in Burning Man who goes to these transformational festivals. I think a very good line to challenge them, and this is the fundamental problem here, is Burning Man for you has become a replacement for God in your life. You might not realize it, but you're going to Burning Man every year. You're going there for healing of all the trauma. You might be taking the ashes of your loved one who died, and you've been keeping them all ready to take to the temple the next year's burn. For you, this whole event and Burning Man culture, the whole world of Burning Man, the principles, this has become a replacement for God in your life. I've used that with people in Scientology and different groups, who don't use the Bible. And like Scientology is basically become a replacement for God in your life. Right. It's kind of like a worldview thing. And I think as Christians, we have to say, hey, just because, there's a place for Burning Man in your life or whatever you're talking about, you also have to look at who you are in this universe. You're created in the image of God under His moral law, under His sovereignty, and you're still accountable to that God in this life and the afterlife.
Yeah, let me just add this too, which is because in these transformational festivals, the physical emulates the spiritual, and I found it very interesting both in the Bloom Festival and even some of the other discussions I've seen, and even like Carl recounting a lot of his discussions. Is that a big thing that they talk about is sustainability,
permaculture.
But they're all doing it in these temporary cities that you can't sustain. That you have to go from the outskirts. You have to go to in a very capitalistic. You have to sort of go from capitalism to these transformational cultures and take all these things, take the lumber that was chopped down, that was manufactured,
supply chain,
made in such a way you're talking about sustainability, but without the supply chain, you're not sustainable.
They're talking about this as a starting point. This is a blueprint for a greater utopic society that eventually they want to create. So people have been criticized about how things are burned at Burning Man and all the fuel and CO2 used to get there, but they're definitely that's their way of trying to make a difference. And without God, like I said, if it wasn't for God in my life, I might be for gay marriage and abortion, but by the grace of God, we have a different grid to look at life, so we don't look at the experimentation, the radical self-expression, and the craziness of Burning Man.
Yeah, and then what you see is that the challenge I think many people end up with who are a burner or who are an attendee of a transformational festival, they embrace a worldview of oneism, and the whole goal within oneism is to ascend. The problem is when all is one, wherever you go, there you are. So as much as you try to get rid of your traumas and do all these things through these transformational festivals, you always end up at the starting point from where you started, which is your own sinful and broken self.
Right, and they're just not seeing it through the worldview.
Right.
So I think that's a great place to start. What is the place of God in your life? Are you using Burning Man as an idol, basically? Is it just a replacement for spirituality? Is it a fake form of invented spirituality? Burning Man is all about traditions. They've created a lot of traditions in the last 30 years of doing it, and going on 40 years now. So it's a counterfeit, very much. So there's a lot of talk among burners about Burning Man culture. They're often very proud of it because of this idea of gifting or leaving no trace, being very environmentally conscious. Burning Man, you have this giant city of 80,000 people, And then in the end, it's gone without a trace. No toothpicks, bottle caps, cigarette butts. They clean that playa. I mean, of course, the Bureau of Land Management, they put a cap on Burning Man. The Federal Government Bureau only wants so many people there so it doesn't do environmental damage.
Right.
But they're very responsible to really clean everything up and take it. So a lot of that's good stuff. But they do have this idea of radical self-expression where everything goes. And they want to push the envelope with their experimentation, whether spiritually or sexually or with psychogenic drugs or illicit substance, anything to push the envelope. This is your chance to get away and just go crazy. There's activities at Burning Man are so raunchy, I can't even mention them here. But the real way to understand Burning Man is through what they call the what, where, when guides.
Yeah, you got a couple of things up here. Tell me about that.
So these are, this is like a really early one.
Yeah.
And then I've got them all, and these are some of the what, where, when guides. There's a whole bunch of them. Every year when you go to Burning Man, you go to the gate, the front gate, and they give you one of these guides. This is the one from Burning Man just finished a few days ago at the time of this recording for 2024. So you go to the gate and you get this book, and it has inside a whole listing of events and workshops and seminars that happen. There's a lot of intellectuals from different universities who are into Burning Man, or just crazy parties or sexual hookups or free food, but some of it's like fun stuff like glass blowing or doing work with leather. So there's a lot of like really weird spirituality. There's a lot of perversion there. You know, often you'll go there and it's like you get your temporary marriage degree as soon as you get there. So your marriage partner in the default world, you're kind of set, now you're set free for the week. You can go around and cheat and fool around, do all this craziness for the week because now you have your temporary marriage, and then you go back and then boom, you know, it's called temporary divorce, actually. Sorry. So you get your temporary divorce when you go in, and then you can go around and do whatever you want, and then you can go back to your kids and your family in the default world. So that's kind of their weird ways. They have a lot of these kind of things in these what, where, when guides. So the thing is to really understand Burning Man, to really grasp, you know, the lightning in a bottle. They also have their guides too of the different events that go on at the event. And they also list all the different times and places you meet for these events. And this really shows what Burning Man's about. To really understand Burning Man, to really understand Burning Man culture, you got to hear it from themselves. Outside of the website, this is the real place in print where they really tell you. Example, some of the weird perversions are going at Burning Man. Now, if I've had to pick some ones that are tamer than some of the other ones, but some stuff so vile and X-rated, I can't even mention them here, but bad enough. So here's some examples of some of the events at Burning Man. Queer sex magic. ATTOL, after this, there's only love. ATTOL's famous orgy dome. Satan's schools for sluts. Come ride our false idols and kiss the snake until the spanking cease. Drank and drink under the devil's disco ball. Bring your own cup. I mean, that's getting a little raunchy. Shamanism. There's a lot of shamanism and a lot of spirituality from the dark side that goes on in Burning Man. And this is the balance view I talked about in Burning Man, not just looking at it for the art. This is real. This is the stuff that goes on in Burning Man. This is the dark underside of the weird spirituality, the weird sadomasochism of sex, the orgy domes. I mean, all the crazy stuff that goes on over there. Shamanistic healing. Dispirited, stuck, get on your mountain. We channel spirit to clean up your nags. Rescue lost souls to get you through your shadow to flow, in group or one-on-one. Shaman's path, transmuting suffering. They talk about Kabbalah and Gurdjieff, the occultists, on their Enneagram. Shamanism, psychedelics, and neuroscience. Our brains produce chemicals found in shamanistic brews. That's natural occurring DMT. Psychedelic entheogens reveal their inner matrix. Drumming, rattling, mushroom, ayahuasca, San Pedro. Animal totem meditation. Check this one out. Enter into your inner world and find the animal spirit totem power within your guided meditation. This is really dark. Advanced shamanistic technique. Tantra is real big at Burning Man. That's kind of an occult sex yoga practice. Tantric meditation, Tantra energy flow, sacred sex, awaken your kundalini, transmute into divine fulfillment, tantric touch for intimate partners.
Right.
A lot of
and
nudity going on.
and just to comment on this real quickly, while this may be shocking and difficult for some people to listen to, is that this is an area where worship is inevitable. And in Romans, where it talks about to present yourself, your body is as a living sacrifice, worship is inevitable. So as Christians, we do that in a particular way. In this case, they're doing the exact same thing. They're just doing it through a worldview of one versus two.
Oneism and twoism.
Yep.
And what is that again?
You have oneism, where creation and the creator, they're interconnected, they're blended, and that's what you deal with. That's ancient paganism. pagan,
like
then you have
without
tuism,
God.
right, where you have the distinct creator who's separate from the creation. That's the outline of Romans 1. And whenever you invert those, when you worship the creation, every single thing becomes inverted. So a lot of even what you see here is worship. A lot of the artwork and things like that are very feminine oriented, and that's just because there's adoration of the divine feminine, goddess worship, those sorts of things. When it goes from a very goddess feminine version versus very patriarchal, in contrast to Christianity.
Dr. Peter Jones.
Yeah.
Read his stuff. He's really great.
1 versus 2.
Yep, he's great.
We didn't invent the term.
That's right.
I had to clarify that on Twitter once.
We haven't mentioned Uncle Wally yet. Is
Yeah.
there some way we could try to weave him in before the end?
Yeah.
It'd be wrong, right?
We're mentioning him right now. We can now later. But yeah, he's well. I think I'll bring him Uncle Wally right now. I think one of the things he talked about too is really, you always talk about any single cult, whether it's a classical cult or the new cults, it's always defining terms and scaling the language barrier. It's good to understand these things and why the history behind it and why they're doing it, so that way you actually understand what's happening. I feel, even though I'm someone on the outside looking in, 5-6 years later from when the podcast started, I think I have a better understanding. I think this will be also helpful too. So when you look at these different transformational festivals or the appeal, I think you'll be able to understand it. So a lot of these are defining terms of the worldview, but also what's even going on within these specific rituals. Yeah.
We're breaking it down. Because they want to make it look like it's the greatest thing. Oh, I went to Burning Man. Elon Musk had a great time and everything. But there's a dark underside, which you get through the What, Where, When guides.
Yeah.
And the pagan worldview and the streams that come together and the weird false history. All cults do this, basically.
Yeah.
There's not a cult out there. They have their official story and they have the real story of what happened. Well, Burning Man's almost the same. It's been pure historic revisionism. Larry Harvey taking all this credit for him creating this thing, but he actually took and drew from a number of sources that he never acknowledged.
Right.
He won't acknowledge the Wickerman parts or any of that, but it's this real Burning Man.
Yeah.
We're unmasking it.
For sure.
A couple more other crazy ones. So spirituality, on attaining Buddhahood in this lifetime, losing my religion, and that's kind of very anti-religion one. Atheist, agnostic soiree at Uli Baba's. We invite all hedonists, heretics, infidels, and cosmically confused to a holy communion of his noodly body and savory blood of blended herbs. Blasphemous, crazy. Channeling voices from other dimensions. Hear, feel, experience other dimensions. Learn to channel from other sources. Contact spirits for healings. This is such dark stuff. I mean...
Yeah, this is ancient. There's nothing new under the sun. This is divination. This is happening not just at the Burning Man culture, but this is somebody experiences it there. Now they want to go and bring this into their everyday life, which means that many of us who are, like my son is 10 months old, and when I'm not around, that maybe talking about, hey, what do you think about channeling another dimension? And like, you got to be able to understand how to articulate that in such a way, because this is all coming to our front door, whether we like it or not.
And when you have a friend at work or a relative who's just gone to the burners, planning to go to Burning Man next year, I mean, people from church often want to go because they're really into artwork. They might not realize that, there's classes on how to open up your body and let spirits come into your body to channel these spirits. They need to know. That's why we're really breaking it down today. A lot of workshops also, they talk about from real diverse perspectives from just about anything. Anything goes pretty much except regular Christianity. I remember when I was walking around there, I mean, a lot of it's really tongue-in-cheek and it's blasphemous, but they do it kind of in a sarcastic way. I remember seeing a Jesus who was dressed up with high heels walking around on a cross. I don't know if he had lipstick, but just dragging this cross around, just stuff, irreverence. There's a lot of irreverence and sarcasm. They had a phone booth for years at Burning Man where it said, talk to God. There's just this phone booth sitting in the middle of the desert. And somehow they wired it up. You get into the booth, you grab the phone, and then it's hello, and then God will answer on the other side. It might be a female, it might be an old man, it might be a young person, and then you talk to God. God, I don't know what to do. My girlfriend's thinking of this, or I'm having this crisis in my life, and you can actually talk to God. So it's this real kind of postmodern kind of weirdness that goes on too. But there's a lot of spiritual elements. But as far as other stuff, the non-Christian stuff, so you have the Taste of Kabbalah, workshop, I Ching, Wiccan spell rhythm, the recitation of the Lotus Sutra, which is the Nichiren Shoshu Na Myoho Renge Kyo, Soka Gakkai International. Consistent with the countercultural, sexual, political, and spiritual themes, you have a lot of holistic health stuff, alternative medicine, introduction of Reiki, the science and alchemy of homeopathic medicine, human energy system healing. And with Burning Man, you have all these different things coming together where it's cultic or occultic or New Age and mystical things. Everything is okay, but disdain for Christianity a lot of people have. They just say, we're getting away from Western culture and capitalism and
Right.
everything. We're getting to this whole new emerging cultures. Burning Man, basically, whether they want to admit it or not, they're advocating hedonism. It's kind of funny because, in spirituality, what is spirituality? For any tradition, it's often self-discipline and not doing the wrong and doing. Burning Man, it's just basically you do anything and just go experiment.
Yeah.
There's, orgies, weird sex, there's blasphemy, public nudity, substance abuse, vulgarity, anything goes. For spiritual events, it's kind of weird. There's a lot of temptation to do evil. It's definitely not for everybody to go. It attracts a lot of socialists and conspiracy people. It's Mardi Gras on steroids. And when you go to Burning Man, at nighttime, everything lights up. They put this L-wire, electroluminescent wire on your bicycles and your cars, and everything lights up, and then the music's pounding 24 hours a day, dance music, you can't sleep, and there's vamp camps where people stay up all night partying. It's just a surreal Sodom and Gomorrah Disneyland, if you will. Pretty wild. The idea of anything goes. It's gotten so wild that when you go in and get your what, where, when guide at the front gate, now the Bureau of Erotic Discourse is giving you a pamphlet what to do in case you're raped. And rape has become such a big thing in Burning Man. They like to keep it hush-hush. But why would they put that little piece of literature when you're coming in for everybody who attends? One of the girls in art camp, she got raped there. She tried to take a picture. The guy took her phone too, and he just rides off into the darkness in the playa, and that's it, and it's really hard to track. So it's really bad. An example of Burning Man culture is a few years ago, the DA was prosecuting this in Washoe County. This father was parading around his 12-year-old son naked on the front of an art car, driving it around the playa. And
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, yes, he was going to get prosecuted. Obviously, a lot of burners would say this is vile, but still, that's the kind of craziness that can come out of Burning Man where you can definitely have an anything go kind of culture. When we start to look at worldviews, this is like the Christian whole world. We're theists. We believe that God is wholly other than the created order he has, the twoism and the oneism. Paganism sees all of nature to be divine and to be venerated. Not all burners are pagans, but that kind of is the flavor, the underlying kind of thing it pushes you to in Burning Man culture. Paganism, I wrote, ends up looking at its relationship with the gods to be transactional, where you have to do different things to appease those different deities. And you have to move their will. Instead of having a sovereign God who you do things on his terms, you're doing things on the terms of these gods. And a lot of the people into paganism do that. And you have to try to get access to this hidden knowledge transactionally. And that often involves moving the god or goddess's hands through different things like divination or different ceremonies and things in this kind of transactional relationships, letting God be God. This goes very much back to Romans chapter 1, which you mentioned. 125, Paul says, "For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator who is blessed forever." That's the whole idea. Christianity, we have a immanent God and a transcendent God. The idea of transcendence is that God is separate from his creation, sovereign over creation, and that's how he can make commandments because he transcends all cultures and everything, the rights and wrongs. That's how he can give law. But he's also immanent. He's able to be involved in the Declaration of Independence in the affairs of men. In paganism, they say that God exists inside of nature, but there's no way he's transcendent. They really reject that. In Christianity, you have the ultimate sense of the transcendent becoming immanent in the incarnation. Where God is out there transcendent, but he comes to dwell with man. And like John 1:14, the word became flesh and came to dwell among us. Very powerful.
Well, it's always interesting, too. I always think about that, the attempt of ascension within those who want to attend transformational festivals. And I always think those who are trying to seek it, when it says no one has ascended into heaven except for the Son of Man who has descended, basically. And you see that contrast.
Immanence and transcendence. Like the God out there beyond his creation, but coming into the realm of men, immanent in creation. Pagans only think all these gods and goddesses are definitely very immanent, but there's no sense of transcendence. They'd argue against that.
Well, and that's why as we understand when you understand the worldview is important because you understand what they're actually looking for. One of my favorite things that I've ever heard Walter Martin say, in this case, pray, he closed out one of his lectures on Scientology with there's a part where he says, "Help us to have compassion and the love of Christ for these who are seeking for help." And he always would, utilize King James English when he'd close out his lectures. You know that.
The ye's and the thous.
Yeah, he said, "But not from thee, but from the forces of evil." So that's when you truly understand and embrace that, it helps you to look at people like in the Bloom documentary, or in this case, people that you've interacted personally, or ones that Carl and Robert have interacted with, to be able to look with compassion and empathy to know that they're trying to find in all these transformational festivals that they can only find in Christ.
Well-meaning.
For sure.
But there's definitely the world of spirit, and that opens up to demons. And I mean, when you're doing these channeling seminars, you don't just open yourself up to any spirit that's out there, a disincarnate spirit entity, and say, come on in.
Yeah.
And kind of that's what you're doing with this paganism.
Right.
So as far as worldviews, you have this idea of immanence and transcendence. So some things like atheism, agnosticism, Marxism, there's no sense of immanence, there's no sense of transcendence. Then you have groups that only have a transcendent God, like the Baha'is or the Kabbalists, that are God is unknowable. He's so far out there you can't get to know him. Then you have the immanence of like, New Age and paganism, pantheism, where God is part of creation. Christianity is that worldview where God is fully immanent and fully transcendent at the same time, which kind of makes sense, right? Like, what would you expect a true God to be? He'd be above his creation, able to make law for all cultures at all time, but at the same time, immanent and able to come to save his creation. So it kind of, there's a sense where Christianity really rings true, like the kind of God is with immanence and transcendence, as far as theological doctrines, beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
I have an argument I've come up with called the polytheist dilemma. And since they believe only in the immanence of their deities and they strongly reject any sense of transcendence, and they say your Christian God is so far out there, he's useless and everything. Well, our question we ask of them is, if all the gods and goddesses exist within nature only, this closed system, right, then where did they come from? How do we explain the origin of their gods and goddesses? If they've always existed, then they have to be transcendent and outside of nature. And paganism rejects that.
Yeah.
So if they exist inside of nature, like paganism says, how do they answer that? Where did they come from? I think that's a real dilemma philosophically for them. So Entheogens is a big part of the fabric of Burning Man, of visionary art, which is kind of fueled. They often get into these hallucinogenic states to create the art. You have a lot of the drugs in electronic dance music. A lot of them, like I said, are in Entheogens, where they kind of have that oneness with everything. DMT is, we're going to talk a little bit about DMT, but since that's a big part of the ayahuasca and some of the drug culture behind all this stuff, it's often called the God molecule, and people have experiences like flying down tunnels and having this kaleidoscopic lights and everything, this whole sense of meeting God, these complex geometric shapes. And a strange and disturbing phenomenon is happening where a lot of people who take large amounts of ayahuasca with DMT, they're having connections with these spirit entities. And it's really unnerving. And it kind of just shows, again, like the kind of the world of demons, the world we live in. Yeah. They call them machine elves sometimes, or DMT elves. Yeah. And among other names, but those are common names. Machine elves is a big one. And they sometimes, people who do these drugs, they'll go off on their psychedelic trips. They'll have conversations with these spirit entities, and sometimes they'll describe them as elves, as spirits, robots, aliens, as human-animal hybrids when they're in their altered states. A statement in the Journal of Psychopharmacology stated the most common descriptive labels for the entity were being, guide, spirit, alien, and helper. Although 41% of respondents reported fear during the encounter, so they're kind of having this fear meeting these entities in their trip.
Imagine that.
The most prominent emotions both in respondent and attributed to the entity were love, kindness, and joy. Most respondents endorsed that the entity had the attributes of being conscious, intelligence, and benevolent, existed in some real but different dimension of reality, and continue to exist after the encounter. Absolutely scary stuff. Yeah. So you can go on to even Amazon and find books like I have here. I'm looking at DMT, the Illustrated Field Guide to DMT Entities. Yeah. DMT Entity Encounters. Podcasts enter the realm of machine elves. Reddit posts 10 types of DMT entities. So this is something going on out there, really dark and spiritual. Yeah. This other dimension that people connecting to, these spirit entities.
Yeah. In fact, I was listening on the way over here this morning, the book you recommend, Return of the Dragon on Audible, and he was these are experiences that encapsulate anybody throughout the history of civilization that we have a record of who have utilized these substances.
Right. So all these, like we talked earlier, we covered a little history, the Mayans, the Incas, and the indigenous religions, shamans, with whether using peyote or ayahuasca. These people have been communicating with spirit entities. That's part of this shamanism, which part of this pagan worldview. And this is the stuff that's going on at these transformational festivals. And now that you said earlier how they're trying to mainstream a lot of these psychedelics, and how Wicca and paganism is becoming so popular now, where paganism was, according to the polls, there was a few 100,000 just a few years ago, or tens of thousands, and now it's becoming in the millions. This stuff's growing, and we got to, as Christians, kind of definitely keeping track of where things are moving. So you got these machine elves and those who cross over to the other side. I said there's malicious spirits. You can't just trust every spirit out there. This is pretty creepy. There's one DMT user describes their experience. When I was first going under, there were these insect creatures all around me. They were clearly trying to break break through. I was fighting letting go of who I am or was. The more I fought, the more demonic they became, probing my psyche and my being. I mean, this is dark stuff. So the old adage, just because it's real doesn't mean it's right, it fits in here. You just don't open yourself up and ask them to come in. It's just some really crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, we've covered that before. These ideas are not just, these aren't just biochemical reactions. There's something that's real and tangible going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I brought up earlier, is it okay for a Christian to go to a transformational festival? There's definitely a lot of Christians like Carl and others who go there to share the gospel on the playa. It's not for everybody. It's a grind. It's difficult to be on the playa. The conditions don't make it easy. It's an exercise in survival. But at Burning Man, you get to see amazing artwork, but there's also a lot of temptation to do evil, a lot of bad stuff over there for Christians. So you got to be prayed up going there. You got to be turning off your eyes and your heart to a lot of stuff that's out there, because it's not like regular mainstream society. There's definitely a lot of spiritual seekers at these festivals. People are looking for meaning, looking for spirituality. So it can be a good one. I would not go alone to a festival. You have to have accountability going with a prayed up Christian group if you do go. Yeah. There's endless debauchery and hedonism on display at Burning Man. I'll read you what I think is a really relevant quote from Bono, that great theologian from U2.
Oh, yeah.
He made it the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, and it's great. And he says, God is in the slums, in the cardboard boxes where the poor play house. God is in the silence of a mother who has infected her child with a virus that will end both their lives. God is in the cries heard under the rubble of war. God is in the debris of wasted opportunity lives, and God is with us if we are with them. And we could also say, Jesus is at Burning Man. There's actually a Christian book called Jesus at Burning Man. Yeah. And it's one of the few books on Burning Man. But the thing is, when we go to this place of utter darkness, this place of debauchery, this place of nudity and partying and wildness, there's a beautiful side, the image of God in us, that allows us to create beautiful artwork and have community and love for each other. Right. But there's also an incredible amount of darkness. And, when we go there, if we go there to share the gospel, we go there armed and prayed up, but we can see the hand of God and Jesus even there. He's not just not on the playa in this place of darkness, but he's even there to reach those who are seeking, who don't know. Yeah, well, that's very much what Paul said at the Areopagus in Acts 17, where he says, he has put himself in such a place that people would reach out and perhaps even find him, though he is not far from each one of us. And and just to reiterate, this isn't for those Christians who go out there. It's not for everyone. Like Robert, when we had our conversation last year, he had somebody that he having a conversation with who had a heart for the mission that he was doing, but then he came to the reality. I was like, you know what? The area of the problem of lust is not something I've truly conquered. He had to leave.
And he just said, it's probably just best I don't go.
A couple days in,
right? And Robert said, brother, I'm glad that you said that. You're all right. Like, you got to be truly honest with yourself. And that's just, and in all honesty, this is not just a Burning Man thing. There's probably missionaries who had to wrestle through that. They're if they're ministering to an area of an unreached area of the world, to different parts of the Incas or places that are unreached where they don't really wear clothes, or if any. I mean, that's probably the same issue of, you look at a lot of the New Testament.
What about like Corinth and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, those are Burning Man on steroids 24/7. Those aren't temporary cities. Those
the Bacchanal festivals of the Romans and stuff. Yeah. So this has been going on for a long time.
A long time, yeah.
Burning Man's definitely, transformational culture we discussed today is becoming a big thing. It's a draw. It's not about just the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses anymore. This is a new tender for a new form of spirituality. This is what people are being attracted to. I mean, whether it's celebrities or billionaires, CEOs and stuff. As Christians, we have to have an answer, examine the worldview, and proclaim the real Jesus of the Bible.
No, I mean, I really appreciate this. This is super, super helpful. I'm sure there's a lot of things you could expand upon. This is a good general overview to really understand the overall encompassing from Burning Man to the history, to the origins, to what goes on there. What do you think these festivals, what does this represent about our culture, where their culture's headed? And especially because this isn't just out in the desert. This is coming and encompassing every single part of our lives. Like, what are the most practical, hands-on ways we can take that? Because the majority of us, people who listen in, aren't going to go to Burning Man. They're going to hear about it in passing, but they are dealing with a culture and a world that's being ever more transformed. How do we interact with that?
We know so many people now who are going to Burning Man or these festivals. Like I say, everybody knows someone who's been to Burning Man now. And these people some go for the spirituality. Some just don't even care about spirituality, just want to party. Some people, believe in the mission of Burning Man, the 10 principles, different reasons people go. But no matter what, they're using this as a replacement for God in their lives. Everyone's got that Christ-centered hole in their heart that they're trying to plug with different ways. Right. Some are doing it with these transformational festivals. It's exciting and fun for some people. Other people tolerate certain parts. They don't like certain parts. It's becoming more mainstream now. I think the New Age was a big thing. thing decades ago,
Yeah.
and it's becoming more mainstream. And a lot of people are replacing it with paganism, this kind of worldview behind these transformational festivals. They know something's wrong in this world spiritually, politically, and they're trying to experience transformation. The title, it says it right there. So our job is to show them true transformation, and also the ministry of reconciliation with Creator. That we don't want to miss them. That we want to show them the good news and the bad news, that we're not God in any sense. Nature's not divine, but we're rotten sinners, and we've offended the true God, the maker of us and of nature.
Yeah, so the summary for this is go into all the world, and even and also to the person next door.
Because Jesus is over there.
Absolutely. Well, man, I appreciate that. It's been a whole year since you've been on, so it's good to have you back in studio. Real quickly, if anyone wants to find out further about this, where can they find you? You got the magazine here. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so if you can go to Spiritual Counterfeits Project's website, SCP, I think -inc.org. You can get that. There's a couple of books on it. I'd eventually like to put out a full-length book on it. We are working on a series of websites that's going to launch. We've made some changes, so it's a bit delayed, but we're doing exposingthecults.com. And underneath that, we're putting a whole bunch of different websites, exposingthejws.com, exposing Mormonism. They're coming. I've seen on the comments on one of the other shows, I clicked on exposing the Baha'is. It's not there. It's coming.
Yeah.
We're building the site. It takes time to do these dozens of sites.
Yeah.
We're also going to be doing exposingburningman.com. We've registered it. We're building content on how Christians can answer the pagan worldview, examples of some of the vile stuff that goes on. So when your friend is ready to go to Burning Man and tell you, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world and it's all great, well, you're going to an event that they're channeling spirit from other dimensions and stuff, and kind of showing you a lot of the other side. So you want a balanced view of it.
Yeah.
We want to love people. Just because they're doing crazy party things means that we don't love them. It means we got to love them more.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been very fascinating. If you all liked this episode, definitely let us know what you thought. Comment on our social media, leave a review. And all that being said, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you all next time on Cultish. Talk to you all soon.